Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Sunday Night Live. Well, you guys know the drill. It's the automotive show where we talk about all things automotive that affect our business, whether it be from the variable ops side, the fixed ops side, whatever side. But tonight we're going to cover something a little bit different. It's those two letters that we don't ever really think about in the dealership. Actually, the only time we think about them is when something goes sideways. Then all of a sudden a major panic sets in, and then we remember, oh, IT, we're going to need some massive help. So I'm very excited because we have with us today John Acosta with Vtech Dealer IT. This guy's a computer guru that's going to demystify the IT world for us today and share with us some of the things that he sees on a daily basis, and going to bring up some questions on things that you might not think about, but probably should. And it's always, that old adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In the IT world, an ounce of prevention is worth a carload worth of cure. So, John, welcome to the show, man.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this. So we've been circling the wagons for a little while, and I'm really happy that we got to put this together.
We're going to geek out tonight, man.
Yeah, nerd out on IT, right?
I'm one of those weird guys that actually gets excited about an Excel spreadsheet.
Right, yeah.
So you are the perfect guy to have on my show. I love it. So thank
Perfect.
you. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you, how you got into the business, what drives you, and stuff like that.
Well, so my name's John Acosta. I'm the CEO of Vtech Dealer IT. A little bit about my background. I was active duty Air Force for 8 years. I was a jet engine mechanic, so a knuckle dragger in some capacities, busting my knuckles out on the flight line, fixing KC-135 tankers, and then I was in the nuke world on B-52 bombers, and really enjoyed that aspect of highly technical, highly trained force. Actually left the military to start a company, and that group of investors were in Miami, and good friends of mine from my previous life, and they happened. I got my rear end handed to me with my first kind of run into entrepreneurship, but they owned a dealership. And the dealership wasn't doing very well. In my last job when I was in the military, I was a quality assurance inspector. So I was curious about dealership operations and how were they, not doing as well as they seemed. And so we went in and did an audit and kind of pulled the thing apart and found out some odd things were happening. And then we restructured the dealership and took it from about 40 cars in 2013 to 135. So doing relatively well, ended up with that project, big huge success. And our IT guy was, we became pretty good friends, so he invited me onto the company. He just acquired a massive client. It was a pretty big name in the auto space and needed help kind of scaling the company. So I jumped in 2014 and was the COO of the company for a long time, and started building it up and building what our offerings were. And we are a professional IT department for car dealers, right? And the concept behind it is that dealers don't necessarily have, uh, let's just say, future vision to see the problems that can arise with technology, right? It's not in their wheelhouse. They usually come from a variable side. Very few come from a fixed side and kind of see it in 30-day turns, right?
Yeah.
And so we're the guys that bring it together and say, hey, if you're slow, if your sales guys are frustrated with their PCs, the network, it's going to start affecting your business. Somebody's going to start trying to hack into your organization. Somebody's going to be social engineering into your organization trying to do that. So we're the guys that sit by, pick up the phone. If an F&I manager can't spin a deal on a Saturday, we pick up, ring, ring. How can I help you, Paul? Let's get you back going and have your back when it really matters.
Now I just want to jump in here on that note. Pick up the phone.
Pick up the phone.
Pick up the phone.
Yep.
Those are four words that in our industry, bigger companies are getting away from that. They're pushing the improved chat. Well, not everybody wants to chat. Some people may want to, but I like your approach to it, because if they prefer to communicate that way, you'll certainly respond to them that way, but you're not forcing their hand to only be able to communicate one way.
Correct.
Right? We all communicate differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty old school in that capacity. I like to hear somebody's voice, and I like to have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
So, it's to say, if I have a vendor that I have a close, and especially how close IT is, if
Yeah.
I have a vendor that is so kind of intertwined and sewn into the fabric of my organization, I want to have a personal relationship with them. And that was kind of my voice, is like, everybody has the guy or their guy. I got a guy for that. We want to be that kind of at scale, right? So it's like, oh, call Paul Jensen at the Cavalli Auto Group would always tell me about this, about what ADP used to be. Is
Right.
the relationship with ADP was so strong that when he went up to training, the technicians that were on the networking side that were helping him out would take him out to lunch, and they'd be like, "Hey,
Right.
Paul, nice to see you," or run over to the Atlanta airport and put a part on make sure the part was on the plane so they could get back up and running. Like, that's the level of service that dealers expect and deserve. Like, that's
Right.
how I look at it. And when my customer says that's the level of service that I want, I'm going to say loud and clear, that's what I'm going to do, right? And not try to reinvent the wheel. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that you have what you need to accomplish the goal, which is to sell and service more cars, right?
Yeah, no, that definitely is the preferred method. We have Ron Usher. Hello, Paul and John. And Robert Allen Carvel. Good evening, Paul and John. He's from Hotlanta, Georgia.
Nice.
And Mark Williamson. What's cracking, car people? Welcome, welcome to the show, guys. Hey, before we get started, I just want a reminder that we have coming up on November 4th our vendor showcase. Basically, what we do is we highlight about 7 different vendors in the automotive space, what they do, and how you benefit from that. So put that on your calendars. There's going to be some sponsorship opportunities as well. I'm going to have the link posted to that. Probably tomorrow, that link will be up. So just a reminder on that. And with that, we're going to get right into the show. So the first item on our list, we're going to talk about phishing. Now, I know it's not what you're thinking, not phishing like when I was a kid and we once caught 100 snapper blues in one afternoon of fishing. Not that kind of phishing. Phishing as it relates to those little demons that end up in your email that trick you into opening it. And when you do, there's a little something called an executable that runs in the background. You're not even aware of it until you find out later on that either your system's locked down or your passwords have been compromised or different accounts that you used to be able to get into, you no longer can. So that's just a little teaser on phishing, but I'd like John to go into a little bit more detail on it because it's a huge, huge problem, bigger than you guys and gals think, because it turns 24/7, constantly. It never ever stops. So John, why don't you talk to us about phishing? And I'm not talking fly fishing either.
Yeah, I mean, so phishing is the most traditional, low impact, biggest, widest net for hackers, right? And it's as simple as pretending to be somebody that you're not and sending an email with the goal of acquiring as much information as possible, right? And that can look like something as simple as your Amazon package has just arrived and you need to track whatever that looks like. And then you log in, put your password. And the reality is that the majority of people use the same password for everything. That's
Yeah.
reality. And so if I'm a hacker and I'm a bad guy trying to go after an organization, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pretend to be as many different things as possible to try to extract as much information as I can. And the reality is that if I put a little bit of phishing with a little bit of social engineering, and social engineering is basically trickery, is that if I can put together something where I say I can look at the about us profile on a dealership's webpage, I can figure out who the GM is, I can figure out who the controller is,
It's
and
right
I
there.
can it's right all the information is right there. In a lot of cases, there are emails right there, or the email structure is right there, and you can say, oh, this dealership goes first initial last name at
Yeah.
Toyota X place, right? And
Yes.
so you can kind of figure out what what everything kind of the structure of everything looks like. If not, you just put the first name and that's it, or just the abbreviation of the first name, and you can gain a lot of information that way. But they start gathering that information, and through these phishing attempts, pretend to be UPS, Amazon, the IRS. They pretend to be the United States Postal Service, your local county traffic enforcement, and in an effort to gain as much information as possible. So once they have your password or you download a malicious link, they can start installing malicious software on your website that can go from just taking your password to ransomware, encrypting your whole infrastructure to a place that you're looking at paying a ransom of $400,000 to $500,000 for an attack.
Now, they're very crafty in how they do this. Okay,
Very.
so now emails can be spoofed today. So if I'm working for a large organization and I send you an email with a spoofed email, so that's a fake email address that I created on a computer. So you might be inclined to believe that I actually work for the company
Yep.
because I have a similarly formatted email address that you're receiving it from. And in the headline, I could put something very compelling that makes you want to open that email. Okay.
Absolutely.
And another problem, and this has been for years, is you have an eBay store. It is so common to get an email that supposedly comes from eBay that it doesn't, that lets you know you've just received funds for this particular car. They actually target you. Okay, they'll win an auction and they'll say, okay, so the terms are PayPal. Hey, no problem. So you get an email, you think it's from PayPal that says, hey, you just got $30,000 wired into your account. Please verify. You think nothing of it. You click on the link in the email because the header says it's from PayPal, although it's probably not. You click on it, you log into your account, and that's when bigger problems happen. It's so easy to do that.
Yeah, and phishing has a couple variants. There's spear phishing, there's whaling, there's vishing, which is voice phishing, where people pretend to be a dealer principal or a controller on the phone. Whaling is really interesting. Is that it's a pretty crafty way of doing things. Is they gather as much information about the organization as possible, and they go between the relationship between the dealer principal and the controller, or the CEO and the CFO, and we've seen that's happened, that they suddenly request a wire overseas for $25 million. It hits one account and poof, vanishes. Or the dealer principal request, it says, "Oh, I'm in a meeting. Make sure that you wire $80,000 to this account with these credentials," and it's a spoofed email. They know that the relationship between who the controller and the dealer principal is, and they can leverage that information to show social engineer the organization to send them money. So it's, for my days in the military, I was always very, very mistrusting of any information that was coming to me, and I was always double verifying. They ingrained that into, especially in the nuke world, it was like trust but verify. Everything was trust
Absolutely.
but verify. And so anything that comes from anybody on my team, I'm always calling, sending a text message, finding a different way to always double authenticate. And
Right.
multi-factor authentication is a big thing, is to say, thunder, and you respond lightning, whatever that thing is, that you guys create a system that is redundant.
I pick up the phone and I call the, hey, did you just send me this? And you'd be surprised how many times the answer is no, I didn't send it to you.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's not that, you know, people always say, oh, I got hacked. No, you didn't necessarily get hacked. Somebody spoofed your email address or somebody spoofed your number. It's not that you got hacked. They're just pretending to be you. And because it's such a huge problem, these bad actors, they spend a long time researching your business. You know, this isn't something they just figure, let me give it a shot. No, this is big business. It's millions upon millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of money that is stolen every year. And so they're very crafty at what they do. Let's see here. LinkedIn user, I'm going to say that's Lamont. Robert, he says, evening, gents. Robert Allen Carvel, big problem in the auto industry. It's actually a big problem in every industry.
Absolutely.
But the auto industry, we're kind of like an ATM machine because what we have is data. And our data is worth a lot of money.
And it's a easy bang for your buck, right? If you go after a dealer, you can get a $40,000, $80,000 payday, and the FBI won't look at anything under $1 million. So you see them going up to like 900,000, 980. Like they won't look at anything really under $1 million. So if I'm a guy and I'm sitting in Romania and I'm highly technical, highly trained, and I'm doing these things on a regular basis, I hit 80,000, 90, 20, 5, whatever that looks like on a regular basis, and I'm living life. I'm living pretty.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Like one $80,000 deal a month. That's not a bad payday.
It's not a bad business.
And even the ones that go over $1 million, I'd venture to say that most of those don't get solved either, because I've heard a lot of instances where the feds will actually tell people, hey, this thing is bounced between so many different servers all over the world, we just can't catch them.
100%.
If somebody got caught, it's because somebody else set them up.
Yep.
You know, that's how I look at it.
Yep.
So it's a huge problem. Robert Allen Carvel says the fraudulent practice of sending emails purporting to be from reputable companies in order to induce individuals to reveal personal information such as passwords and credit card numbers. Yeah, it happens all the time. And Mark Williamson says, I won the South African lottery 14 times 1 year. Also, never knew I had so many rich relatives in the other countries that died. Go figure. Now, here's another one. Okay, and I hate to single out guys, but it just is what it is. Okay, all these emails that come from some hottie that wants to share her pictures with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, hundreds upon hundreds. You may click on just one because you're curious. What happens on some of these emails where there's an executable that you don't even need to click on a link in?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, in the military, we had this thing, you know, when that would happen on Facebook, the joke was not today, ISIS. You know, it's like everybody was thinking that ISIS was out to get you. So it became part of the subculture of the military. When you saw something suspicious, the joke was not today, ISIS, right? It was be like, okay, so it's getting ingrained into people's ideas. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And that's the effort that, you know, I try to take a lot of this education stuff from a comedy perspective. So in modern day car sales, I always post, you know, I'm part of the modern day car sales group from Clubhouse. And so I'm always posting kind of funny things to remind people of, you know, the awareness of and keep that top of mind, the IT side, and security is everybody's responsibility, and kind of make it a fun, kind of funny top of mind thing. So.
And another one too is, you know, these messages you get in Messenger. Is this you? I saw a funny video of you.
Yeah.
Just like Robert Allen Carvel says, delete it. Do not open.
Absolutely.
Delete it. And I'll always call the person. They're easy to recognize after. If you're familiar with it, and that comes from continual training to let people know, hey, they're all going to be very similar. A lot of these attacks that come in, you just have to know the basics and recognize it, and then just delete it, or just contact. If you're not sure, don't make a mistake and click on it. Just contact the person that supposedly sent it to you to verify whether or not they sent it. If they did and they vouch for it, by all means, then
Yeah.
you can open it. But if it's not that, you're better safe than sorry. So cybersecurity is something that should be taken a lot more seriously than it is. I think it's almost like, well, I'm here on the food chain. I'm not up here, so it doesn't really affect me. So why do I really care? I'll just take a look. But everything really does affect you, because if the
Yeah.
dealer goes down and they find out, because it's all trackable, right? You know where
100%.
the incursion occurred. They'll know you're the person that brought them down. That's not going to end well for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. That's not a fun day.
Now, projects at the dealership. I love this one because, very few people look at their IT infrastructure to begin with, but there are companies that will buy stuff that impacts their IT infrastructure that they really have no idea about, and when things don't work properly. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so kind of how we see it is that there's a natural resistance of change in the dealership space, right? There's the service advisor that's been doing it the same way for 25 years and he's making a killing, and a new system is coming in, or a new product that they want to implement, or a new way of doing business. The idea is that not to make IT an additional excuse of why that product is going to fail, right? The dealer
Right.
has already made their decision. The management team is doing their damnedest to implement that, right? To make sure a right implementation is going to happen, and we don't want IT to be an excuse or a failure in that, or to be a barrier of entry. And it may be something as simple as hard drives on a PC not having enough capacity,
Yeah.
RAM on a PC, or maybe they're Chrome based and they don't have they're using too much RAM, or simply
Yeah.
the Wi-Fi is not strong enough, or the network in the organization doesn't have enough bandwidth to be able to support car film videos to be able to send car films of your service tickets to every to every customer. So it's like, don't make IT the excuse or the barrier of entry, which is something that you can prevent. Um, Something that's going to derail your hard-earned implementation of something, because you're throwing a money away in that capacity. You've already spent the time and brain damage to go through and vet what the company is going to do. You've gone through that process, and if you implement it correctly, it's going to be a huge success. Don't make IT be one of those barriers by not including IT or leading the project from an IT perspective out, is kind of how we see it.
What I would challenge anybody is to go back to your store and say, hey, when is the last time that we really looked at our IT infrastructure? Because when you start looking at some of these things, there are a lot of appliances in your IT, right? You've got routers, you've got switches, all kinds of wires, access points, wireless access points. All of this stuff works with specific software, but also has a specific end of life.
Correct.
And you would be surprised how many stores we'd gone into and found appliances that had an end of life that ended 5 years ago
Oh yeah.
or 6 years ago. Now, here's the killer part. On your computer, you may get an email from Microsoft that says, hey, we no longer support your version of Windows 10 as of this particular date. We suggest you update to a newer version. Okay, so fairly simple. You go on the Microsoft site, you know what version you have, because that's easy to find out in your computer. And now you download the updated version of that. But guess what? Your appliances that have firmware that gets updated with added security measures isn't going to send you an email that says, oh, by the way, your access point had an end of life 5 years ago, and
Yeah.
5 years ago we stopped doing upgrades. Could you imagine if those patches you get, like just about when you're going to go into a meeting with somebody, all of a sudden your computer decides, oh, now's a great time to update because I'm going to screw you out of your meeting.
Yeah.
Never
Yeah.
happened to anybody, right? These things don't do that. What is the implication? If you have a thing that the end of life was 5 or sometimes even 10 years ago, what are the implications of something like that?
There's well, first of all, they're not getting patch updates, right? Security patches, and that's the biggest vulnerability. It's like to say there's a system that you had from 2003. Let's put an extreme example, right? You're running a 2003 server that hasn't been getting security patches since 2005, right? Is the
Yeah,
reality, like, or 2009 is to be accurate, excuse me. So you're looking at something that you're in extreme danger of having a huge vulnerability, and the
huge.
hackers can walk into those doors. And if you go to your insurance company and say, I haven't upgraded my system since, you know, it's a 20-year-old system or whatever that looks like, you don't have a leg to stand on. and
Right.
and that's the biggest vulnerability, is to say, look at your system, look at what was the last updates, have an idea of it, or at least know where your problems are. And look at the organization holistically. Is like, look at all your systems in the organization and say, okay, your IT equipment should be refreshed every 5 to 7 years. That's the reality.
Yeah.
And have a budget for it. Have
Right.
an actual IT budget and say, you got to change your hunter machines, you got to change your alignment machines, you got to change your, rotating your disk rotating
Yeah.
machines. Like, you got to maintain your IT systems the same way. And so that's the rule of thumb, is 5 to 7 years is really the lifetime that you're going to get out of your IT equipment. And make sure that if you're implementing a project, that you have a robust enough IT system that's going to be able to deliver a good experience and not derail the project in its infancy, which is already a difficult part to do.
And here's the kicker, right? Most stores, I've been in the industry, everybody knows, 41 plus years. I've worked for not that many stores, but all the stores that I've worked in, I don't remember anybody coming in to do an IT checkup.
Hmm.
Okay. The only time IT checkups get done, typically, from what I've seen, is when somebody's looking at changing their DMS system.
Correct.
Okay. Because before they sign you up for the new DMS, they're going to want to take a look and see, do you have enough bandwidth to execute the programs that you need to based on the new demands of the new system. And let's face it, we don't like change in the car business. Oftentimes, we may hate the DMS that we have. We hate it with a passion. But guess what? They're signing you up for 5 to 7 years at a clip.
Yep.
And even if your left arm is in the meat grinder with your software, you're still going to rather tolerate that pain
Absolutely.
before embracing a new system.
The thing is, so I took a class in college. It was called business systems integration, and it was about ERP installations. And what the reality is, that when the DMS tells you we're going to change, or we're going to go from, DMS connection to drive, or we're going to go from ADP to dealer track, or whatever that looks like, it takes 24 months for that cycle to complete, if you do it right, if you do it the right way. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, you have to have champions, you have to have early adopters, you have to have a project management cycle. And like, the ecosystem of that change is so difficult that you're not going to hire a controller that's a Reynolds controller over one that's a CDK controller, right? It's like, even if
Right.
she's the best controller on the planet, or he's the best controller on the planet, you're going to say,
Yeah.
they don't have CDK experience, or they were on, dealer
Hmm.
track, or whatever that looks like. So those are the things that are not necessarily taken into account, and then people throw their arms out and say, oh, this is garbage, let's revert back to the old way, without taking, that IT first perspective
Right.
into things. And that's, I guess, one of the things that I guess an opportunity for the industry is to say, leave dealer principals to own the dealership and run it the most efficient way as possible. That's why we take project management so seriously. It's like,
Yeah.
let's get all the stakeholders and get everybody involved, so we can help the ease the process as much as possible. And we see dealers that take advantage of that, and really put their arms around that process, and leverage us to do that. And there's other dealers that don't necessarily do that, and fail in some of those implementations because it gets really rocky.
Now, from what you see on your end of it, okay, how often do dealers actually reach out and say, hey, I want to check my system because I want to make sure that I'm protected? How
Um,
often does that happen?
so it happens with our customers a lot because we really push it. We're constantly like, you got anything going on? Anything that's going to come up? Any implementations? Any remodels? Any buy sells? Any new process implementations? Any new credit card machines? Like we're constantly keeping that top of mind. It's not always successful, but I would say like 60% of the time we get pulled in. And then 60, the other 40% of the time is like, hey, by the way, tomorrow we're upgrading all the printers at the organization. So be there with your team the next morning. And we're running around trying to get things spun up as fast as possible. And it makes things a lot more difficult. So a little bit of planning really helps out those processes to make sure that it goes smoothly and you don't have downtime.
So somebody, let's say, that's not your customer, it might, I mean, you train your customers to be aware of the dangers,
Correct.
but somebody who's not your customer, that's just releasing, re-upping their contract at least 2 times since the first time
Yeah,
they got it, they're
absolutely.
they're 15 to 20 years since they had hardware replaced. That use
Correct.
yourself is a 5 to 7 year stint, right?
Yeah,
So you're almost like the doctor that makes the house call. I mean,
correct.
how involved the process is it to me pick up the phone? Hey, it's Paul at XYZ Motors. You know, I've had my current system now. I re-upped it a couple of times, but I don't know whether or not I'm sufficiently protected. What's involved in you coming out to the store and doing an assessment?
Yeah, so
Time-wise.
time wise, it usually takes a day for me to kind of get my arms around what the organization is, right? It
Yeah,
really depends. They might have a super sharp service advisor slash IT guy, right? That's been doing their best for the last 30 years
yeah,
and kind of has a whole handle of things. Those are kind of the very common to happen. Um, and they might have everything, painstakingly took notes of everything, and that might take half a day. But there might be some hodgepodge of things that been happening and they don't necessarily have their arms around. And it really is like going to the dentist after not being to the dentist for 15 years. It's like, okay, let's see what this looks like. And you're pulling
yeah.
away around layers of who used to manage this. It's like, oh no, they had an ADP network and then they stopped doing maintenance on it. And then they have a, IT guy that comes around, a backpack guy that comes around to fix it, and who manages the phone system. And having an idea of those things can be either a 4-hour process or it can take 2 days to put our arms around it.
The point is, it's relatively painless.
Yeah,
I'd rather
absolutely.
find out and know where I'm at and know what my options are than not.
Yeah. We do
Another,
a one sheet, and sorry to interrupt you. We do a one sheet that says this is where your servers are at, this is where your computers are at, this is where your Wi-Fi is at. Here's your cybersecurity, here's your training, here's your email, and then we'll give you a scale 1 to 5 where you're leaning on that, and give you some pointers on how to move forward. My idea is at the end of the day, we want this industry to be better, stronger, faster, so we can deliver a better
yeah,
experience to the American consumer. I love this business. I'm passionate about vehicles. I'm passionate about the dealership space. I've made incredible friends in the space. I'm very proud to be part of the car business.
and you and I are
Um,
the same. We're like this.
Yes, exactly. And I want this to be stronger. I don't want the Carvanas and the rooms of the world to win. I want the dealer that's local, that invests in their community, that is part of the of
Little League, all that
yeah,
other
Little
stuff.
League, exactly, like the Boys and Girls Club of
Yeah,
Habitat for Humanity, one of the largest job creators and job providers in their market. Those are the guys that I'm rooting for, not for the big faceless conglomerates out there that are trying to give us a bad name.
I'm with you, man.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, so another thing is, so emergency response, right? A
yeah,
lot of times when stuff goes sideways, there's really nobody to call, even
absolutely.
simple things. I need a form, right? I need a
Yeah,
form changed in my system. You might put a request in today. You might not get that form back for weeks.
Absolutely.
So now let's take an extreme scenario. Okay, we have a fire at the store. The store burns down. I still need to sell cars. My inventory didn't burn down. My store burnt down and all the wires that were inside it.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to get on the phone. I'm going to get some trailers in real quick. The trailer piece is easy, right? They're cubicles. They're put on a truck. They're dropped off. Now we need somebody to wire that stuff up. I need my computers to work, and I need them to work yesterday. Talk to us about emergency response.
So that actually happened to us, right? I was at my house. I live in South Florida, right? So I'm sitting at my house Saturday morning. I'm making some coffee, and I get a call from one of my operators, right, and one of my customers, and we have a great relationship. And he says, "John, there was a fire at Midland." It's like, "Okay, is everybody okay?" He's like, "Yep, there was nobody at the dealership. It was overnight, but half of the dealership burnt down." I said, "All right, let's get to it." So we emergency shipped over. One of my guys flew over there, got the network equipment, got some PCs, started loading the trailer. And by the time Wednesday was rolling around, Tuesday to Wednesday was rolling around, they were connected to the internet because we'd backed up everything that they had in the cloud in our data center. They were back in business by that Wednesday, selling cars. And the cool part of the story is not, how fast we got them up and blah blah blah, is that they sold 27 cars on a
That is a cool part of the story.
Yeah, but like the part that makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside is that they sold 27 cars on a Texas handshake, because that's how you do business in Midland, Texas. So that was like kind of a heartwarming part of it. And like the community came together and really supported the dealer, and that was really cool to see. But getting that call was when what that customer always says is like, "I got a guy." And it's like, I know I can count on my guy. And that's what we try to be for dealers. Is like, I got a guy. And that guy's gonna, whether if that's your field or the field tech that we provide, or your networking guy, or your sysops guy. The sysops guy for us is like the guys that do heavy lifting and they're coordinating more difficult projects, or the CEO of the company that has your back no matter what. And that's the service that we try to provide to our customers.
Now you said something that's very important. You said because you had the data backed up in your data center,
correct,
you were able to get them up and rolling.
Yep.
Now, I've done some PC repair years ago, and backup. Well, let's just say people learn about backups when they lose all their data, and the IT person yells at them because they never backed up their data.
Yeah.
So to proactively have a plan,
correct,
to not only secure your data, but to back it up in a way where if catastrophe hits, you're able to relaunch. I mean, that's priceless. Backup is fairly simple today, no?
Yeah, it's very relatively simple nowadays. It's become so standard that it's relatively simple to do. It's just you have to implement it. It's like it's you always need it the day after the issue is like, oh, we should have had backups. And that's the biggest thing is like, some of these ransomware attackers have gotten so sophisticated that they live in your infrastructure for a year, 18 months, looking where all the backups are happening. And they might, that you might have backups on site and not go to a third place to a tertiary backup. And then they encrypt the backups as well, or they delete all your backups. So it's not a silver bullet for this by any means, but it creates a huge barrier for, or creates a good plan for business continuity if you have those things in place. And it's relatively straightforward to do. Any IT guy worth their salt can set up a backup for you.
I mean, back in the day, there were tapes.
Exactly.
Right? That at the store you'd have to swap out the tape.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And half the
then
time
you rewrite the Sunday tape with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Half the time they didn't want to do it because it was a pain.
Yeah.
Like, they'll never know.
Yeah.
They'll never.
Yeah. And it's
But
not
now,
until you really need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now You don't have, I mean, it requires no manual intervention at the store level anymore.
None whatsoever. I mean, there's services out there that are now considered to be business continuity services. So if there's a major disaster like that happens, that backup is communicating with the cloud already and will spin up your environment in the cloud so you can do business again. So the infrastructure on site almost becomes redundant in this business continuity type of issues. So it's very 21st century 2021 technology that there's no excuse now, and it's relatively affordable.
Now, with the networks that you set up, you monitor the
Correct.
traffic within that network,
Yeah.
right? So you know what's taxing it, what's not taxing it, prioritizing. Do you want to make sure that the person in the waiting room playing Call of Duty is fully up and running before you have your CRM system
Correct.
or some of your other systems running? No.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also monitoring insofar as communications. Talk to us about communications within the store, between employees, and being able to see some of the signs when there's a problem before it becomes a problem.
So the good thing about our systems now is that we have the ability to look at your infrastructure as a whole. So we can look at your PCs, and I can look at everything, every system that's happening down to your CPUs or your RAM on every single PC, and what utilization and what programs they're using from a 30,000-foot view. Your network the same way, your firewall the same way, the servers the same way, and even the communication inside of your organization. So it's demystifying, the black box of what the IT was, right? It's like, well, I got an IT guy that kind of knows what's going on, and he'll figure it out. And you're putting all your eggs in kind of that basket, which is, in my view, extremely dangerous. But we also, it's not as much as the data that's going into the organization as the data that's leaving and how it's leaving. From our firewalls, I can say your guys are spending the majority of their time in the CRM, or they're spending the majority of their time on ESPN.com or Netflix, or I can shape what's priority. So I can say, hey, your CRM, your DMS, your merchandising, your website is going to be your priority, things that are going to load up the fastest.
Yeah.
If you're doing Netflix or YouTube or whatever that is, that's going to be lowest priority, especially on the guest network for the customers. We're going to make that accessible, or we'll segment that and give it a completely different internet traffic. Let's get a Comcast to take care of that stuff, while your main business software is on your strong fiber internet service provider. So the days of the IT guy kind of going behind the curtains and doing these things are over. That that's that that's been demystified. I can give you a report of, like, what do my PCs look like? Here's your report, Paul. You have 25 PCs that are 7 years old. These probably need to be replaced. These guys are going to look at replacing in the next 12 months. These guys are good. This is what your network looks like. These are where your bottlenecks are. This is where your people are spending the majority of their time researching, or wasting time and wasting productivity. I can tell you basically everything that's happening in the organization from an owner's perspective or from a GM's perspective.
The great thing about technology, computers, and appliances is that everything has a specific address.
Correct.
So it's very easy to map out what all of the components are contained within a system, and you could track a problem back to a specific PC or a specific appliance.
So what we do, and it's gotten so sophisticated that I can say P. Meijer spent 70% of his time on matchmaker.com rather than on the CRM. You know what I mean? And it's going to tell you what website it went to. It's going to tell you what user, how long that user was on that website. It's going to tell you, it's going to tell you everything that happened. It stops short of taking snapshots of what's actually happening on the PC, which is an invasion of privacy in some capacity. But if you have a strong use policy for the organization, they know what they should be doing and what they shouldn't.
Right. And another area too, by monitoring this as a store, a lot of stores have Net Nanny or some of these other programs. But guess what? People find ways around that. So
Yeah,
unless you have a good setup where you're actually monitoring all of the traffic, not just from an employee standpoint, but there's so many products that stores buy, that GMs buy, that directors buy, and some of these guys leave, they turn over. Yet the data comes in and goes
absolutely.
out.
Yeah,
A lot of times when you do an audit, the people that are in charge in the store now may not even be aware of a handful of products that are regularly communicating with the mothership outside of the store. They don't even use
absolutely.
that product anymore.
And in some cases, those companies have gone out of business, so it's just an open door.
Yeah.
That's the dangerous part. It's like to make sure that those things are monitored and closed behind.
And when you think about, a store that's been around for a few years, might have a database of what, 50,000 customers,
Absolutely.
right? There's financial information that's in there.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if you had to pay for 2 years worth of credit monitoring for 50,000 people in your database? Not to mention the damage to your reputation. Who's going to want to give you their information if they know you just had a major breach and it turned out that breach was preventable?
Correct. Yeah. And in a lot of the cases, so we have it's called a security operations center. And the
Yeah.
security operations center is looking at everything that's going in and out of our firewalls and the network and how PCs are communicating with different areas. And if they see unusual patterns and they see it's AI based and it's
Yeah.
AI augmented more than based, right? Because they'll get 5 million, they'll get 5 million hits in a day, and then they kind of distill it down to 100,000, and then they'll get down to like 50 events that they have to look at. But
Yeah.
basically how it goes is like if it's something's out of outlier and outlier of a pattern, and say you have a PC that's communicating with Ivory Coast or with Montenegro or with North Korea, like there's something going on, right? And
There's
so
no parts coming from there.
exactly. There's no parts. There's nobody VPNing to Montenegro or whatever that looks like, and they'll cut that connection or disallow that connection from happening. So those are the guys that have my back, which I'm very grateful for. Always is the guys that are sitting behind those screens, 24/7, 365, looking at maps all over the world and killing those connections as they happen, and are protecting the dealership from these major issues.
And what's interesting is that you can't be too careful today, because even when they have some of these net nanny programs and things like that, there are proxy servers that pop up, new ones every single day. So you can now see proactively if a good number of your sales traffic is going to this proxy server, because guess what? When you go through that proxy server, what you've basically done is you've created another doorway into the building
Correct.
that you're not sharing with your boss, because you're using that to go to places where you shouldn't go, where people regularly set traps for you to click on things that you're not supposed to click on. And the thing about security is, how many people do have credit monitoring service for themselves personally? I'd say probably way not enough.
Yeah.
But what's great about these services, and it also validates the dangers, is that all of these sites that you sign up on, okay, you might as an individual go on many different, yellowbook.com, puppies.com, whatever.com you want to talk about. There are so many, because they all have their free accounts for you to look for stuff. And you said earlier, and I've known this too, that people tend to use the same passwords shared across various different platforms. So now what happens is those companies that don't invest in IT security and infrastructure, they get cracked. They then take that database that they get off of that particular website, and they post it to the dark web,
Correct.
because my monitoring service will tell me the minute if a past password, and I use all different alphanumeric and character sensitive passwords, different ones for everything. It's a pain in the butt, but you have to do it. I'll get a notification that, oh, so my email and login credentials were found on the dark web on April 21st, and this is the website that it was found on. Now I look at it and I say, oh yeah, that was an old password that I used before on that site, but because I changed them, and nothing's foolproof, but at least with a company like yours and Robert Allen Carvel put it, thank goodness we have John's company to handle this.
Thank you, Robert.
Right? Because a lot of people don't.
Yeah, we do this. We run a report as something that we give to dealers. It's called a dark web breach assessment, and it's a full report of every single password that has an at yourdealership.com email that has been compromised. Right. So MySpace, LinkedIn is a big one. Target, data dump. There's been massive. So one of the ones that I always find kind of the most embarrassing and interesting one is the Ashley Madison hack.
I was just thinking of that one.
Yes. So my fear is always this: is that F&I manager has a compromised email on Ashley Madison, and a guy that's doesn't have to be super sophisticated says, "Hey, I know that you have a family. I know that you've been on Ashley Madison with your work profile. Well, how about I nuke your family, right? I send all this stuff to your wife unless you start giving me 3 or 4 social security numbers a month, or start giving me credit card numbers." That your dealer's 100% liable for that. You're going to be in a world of hurt for those types of situations if you're not preparing yourself accordingly.
And the person that's forced to do that may not see that they have any other alternative, because they're not ready to go home and say, oh, listen, by the way, yeah, remember that Ashley Madison thing?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. And a dealer might, for having his employees' backs or whatever that looks like, maybe getting ahead of that, knowing that liability is there, and have an action plan for whatever that looks like. So those are things that I'm. It's not super sophisticated stuff. I'm not an IT guy. I'm not a guy that's sitting behind a computer coding things. It's just about getting the data that's out there, putting it together, more orchestration than anything. And that's a sophistication level that you have to have as a dealer, is to know what's out there, know what your issues are, and just how to protect them and chip away at that risk rock, and just chip away at it until it's a sliver that's very tiny, that you're well protected and you've done some best practices in order to protect your organization. That's it. That's really all you can do. Anybody that tells you there's a silver bullet for IT or cybersecurity, turn around and run away. That's the best advice that I can give you. But you can minimize that risk. You can have a wide open door and people can waltz into your place, or you can have ADT, some Dobermans. You talk about cybersecurity at your house all the time. Have a backup plan, have a generator, have some food stored away. Like a guy that lives in Florida. Like, hurricane preparedness is very similar to cybersecurity preparedness. It's like, have a plan, and when that plan happens, it's going to happen. It's maybe, thank God, this year has missed us completely. Thank God, but it has a lot in common with that. So.
And Kurt Von Annen says, we are all in data-driven industries. Unfortunately, more than us sees value in the data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and here's the thing. If something does happen, and it can, no matter how careful you are, there is no 100% guarantee that you're going to be safe and out of harm's way. It just doesn't exist. But I would rather be the person that says, hey, listen, on these dates, because we have regular training, this is when we trained regarding phishing, regarding cybersecurity. On these other dates is when we had John's company come in, do an assessment, look at our hardware, we determined that we had 3 appliances that were beyond life, that we replaced, swapped out, new firmware. We made sure that we monitored traffic. We sensed a pattern of a problem. We had a group of employees that were accessing porn and all kinds of stuff they weren't supposed to via a proxy server. We found that, we snipped that connection immediately.
Yeah.
Something still happened. Maybe somebody walked into the store, took a flash drive when somebody wasn't looking, because let's face it, all the computers are out on the desks, out in the open.
Yeah.
There's no computer that's locked. Slipped something in, ran an executable. I'd rather be the person that had all that data or
Yeah.
all that proof to say this is what we did to prevent or try to prevent something from happening, than be the person that says, I didn't know.
Yeah. And not only that is to have the confidence that you have a team that can get you out of the mess when you're in it. You know what I mean? Like that's my biggest thing. It's like having the guys that are next to you rather than telling you how much water's in the boat is have buckets.
Yeah,
It's side by side. Let's get this knocked out and get onto the other side to do that, because there's something to be said about going through some crap with somebody, right? And
right.
that's really it's gonna happen, whatever that looks like.
Yeah,
And do you want the guy like I always ask when I'm on a vendor call, it's like tell me about your best implementation and tell me about your worst. Because I want to
right.
know what the worst is. I
Yeah,
want to know how they react when they get, kicked in the teeth and they get themselves back up and running and think outside of the box and get spun up again. That's the thing that I'm always really interested in. I really want to provide, my customers or whoever they look like with that mindset. It's to say you want whoever you're partnered with, make sure that there's somebody that you can be in the trenches with, because you're going to get kicked in the teeth once in a while. And you want to be there with a partner that can be able to do something.
and then today, having a good IT infrastructure is even more important, because look at a lot of these cars today. How many of them need software updates, right?
Yeah.
A store that's in the Stone Age, they're bringing all those cars in, tying up the lift, because software updates don't always happen instantly. Sometimes
Correct.
they take longer. Imagine if you had a system where you could have 20 cars outside being updated without so much as tying up one lift,
Yeah.
while your techs were busy turning wrenches in the bays on cars that needed to be in those bays. How many
Absolutely.
people even think about that?
Yeah, the future proofing your dealership is a huge issue, especially with electrification. A lot of those charging stations need additional power requirements. They need
Right?
second circuits coming in. They need to be connected to the internet. They have to have Wi-Fi connectivity. A lot of these EVs get automatic updates, like you were saying. Need to speak to Germany or
Yeah,
to Japan or for whatever that case is.
but
It's
not North Korea.
Yeah, but not North Korea, exactly. But you know that it's like I like to run towards problems rather than run away from them, and that's kind of my style. And I enjoy figuring these things out. It's really fun to and one of my favorite things is to get with a dealer that's like forward thinking, and it's so much fun because you can look 5, 6, 10 years later and be like, oh, remember when we put that and it worked for that
Yeah,
growth? And we put a second conduit in for the growth of that, or we put, conduit for the Wi-Fi, and this is going to, this, we were planning for the future, and it's just saves you a lot of money. Just
yeah.
proper planning saves you so much money.
Remember when you ran into these problems because you didn't have enough, and from this particular date on forward, since we've been working
Yeah.
together, we've been able to avert crisis in all these different areas.
Yeah.
How much of your stuff has gone down because you didn't have enough resources?
And that's the thing is like we're experts and we've seen it all from like we did 5 buy sells in July of 2020 in the middle of pandemic. We were flying cross country in empty planes to do 5 buy sells, working 36 hours straight, like going through and we understand the dealership from that perspective, right? From the buy sell to the remodel to new constructions to, kind of this holistic support of the ongoing day to day. That's the easy stuff. Like the day to day is the easy stuff, because we don't see one problem with FMC dealer at one dealership. We see it at all the dealerships, right? If
Right.
FMC dealers down in the whole country, we kind of know, and they're like, already we got you guys a fix so you can work
Right.
around for it. And it's about that business continuity more than anything.
Well, you know, the hour always comes up so fast. This has been very exciting. It's been informative. I appreciate you spending the time with us tonight. What I'd like you to do is after the show's over, if you go into the post on my profile, you'll be able to comment in there. Please put your all of your contact info in there, because, and I say this every week, you always remember what you forgot to ask after you have the opportunity to do so. And you guys are nationwide, you're car guys. So if you put all of your information out there, because I'm sure somebody's going to have a question for you, and I would strongly advise all of you and or your friends in the business, your community, have them give John a call and at least have a conversation about when's the last time you went for an IT physical.
Yeah.
Right? You could put off a major problem by having a simple conversation today rather than wait for that problem to happen tomorrow. Mark Williamson says, very eye-opening info here tonight. Thanks for sharing. Great show. I appreciate you guys tuning in every week. Thank you. I hope you all have a safe and productive week coming up. And don't forget, November 4th is the vendor showcase. And I will have the links up probably tomorrow for sponsorship opportunities. Go on www.dealervendormatch.com, click on events, and you'll see the tab for the November event coming up. So with that, thanks for watching Sunday Night Live. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Paul.